So practically speaking, who has more influence on lay Christians? Not on you personally as a lay Christian, but lay Christians as a whole is kind of what I'm asking here, right? So practically speaking, who has more influence on lay Christians? Is it bishops or content creators? Whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, Twitter. Who at this point has more practical impact? And now notice I said practically speaking, right? Practically, who influences people's theological positions, opinions? Is it the bishops or is it content creators? And I'm not asking whether or not, which one is theologically correct, like which one it should be. I'm not asking which one it should be. I'm just asking practically, what is it, whether it's right or wrong. And as you can see, look, 84% said content creators have more influence practically over the bishops. 16% said bishops, 84% said content creators. I do think that's accurate. Now, whether or not that's a good thing, whether or not it should be that way is a different question. In reality, it probably shouldn't be that way. It should be the bishops who have more influence on the average lay Christian than content creators. So for the fact that we're now in a situation where they have less, in fact, I would say significantly less influence than content creators, that's scary to me. Now, it might not be a big issue if the content creators are doing good work and building people up in the faith and calling them to be faithful to the magisterium, right? At that point, it's not an issue. But what if those content creators are not faithful to the magisterium, are in dissent, and are calling for dissent, and are promoting dissent? At that point, we have a massive problem now, don't we? And it's a big problem not only for the church, it's also a massive problem for the bishops, because it means they've lost so much impact and influence that I don't know how they're going to recover from that. Now, you do have some exceptional cases where you have someone who's both a bishop and a content creator, but those are pretty rare. The majority of bishops are not in this position. So this is becoming disturbing. Now that we've reached a stage where, right or wrong, content creators have more influence, practically speaking, on the laity than the bishops themselves, that is dangerous territory. What happens when those content creators call people away from the Catholic Church and they call them to something else? You're going to have a ton of people leave the church. Or what happens if it's more subtle and they say, be Catholic, but they call people away practically from the Catholic Church, telling them to remain Catholic, but in reality, abandoning the Catholic faith in one way or another? It's a lot more subtle then, but you're going to see a lot of people who are influenced by that. I think this is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And what's unfortunate is I'm not certain the bishops realize that this is an issue yet. And that's sad. And they should know better. They should know this issue is going on, but I'm not convinced they do. I'm not convinced they know what's going on and that they realize the power of social media and the kind of influence it has on people. I don't think they realize that. They have underestimated it. From the bishops all the way up to the Pope, they have underestimated it. And I think we're going to see the consequences of this disaster. And I would argue we're already seeing the consequence of this disaster erupt in our face. And I think it's going to get worse and worse and worse. Hopefully, the bishops will wake up to this and do something about it before it's too late. Thank you for this super chat, Daniel. He says, hey, Michael, I read your book, Answering Orthodoxy, and I loved it. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad it was helpful. Dan K says, the bishops tend to stay away from YouTube, I've noticed. They need better PR teams. Yeah, better PR teams, better advisors. They need to be more visible to the flock. I literally had somebody in the comment section tell me less than an hour ago. They asked the question, how many times have you ever heard your bishop teach? And they said, for me, 0. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I can't say that they're unique in that. Looking through the chat here. Bishop Barron is the bishop with the most influence. I think so. When it comes to bishops with influence, I think that's probably true. But you'll notice, again, that's kind of a minority thing. That's pretty rare. Bishops need social channels, especially YouTube. Bishops should be putting out Bible study videos, catechisms, and sermons every day. I agree. What you're going to hear from them is, I just don't have the time. And then you have to wonder, okay, well, have we missed the forest for the trees here? Ultimately, a bishop is not to be a CEO and is not to be a business manager. I know some of that is involved in running a diocese. I get that. I totally understand that. But if that's front and center and the teaching part and the shepherding part is way in the back, we've missed it. We've missed it. We've put the cart before the horse, and we need to go back to teaching, preaching, leading, pastoring. That needs to be front and center. And then we can talk about running a diocese as far as the administrative aspect. So I suspect that's the response you'll hear, though. Okay, thank you so much, Vincent. Should people be reaching out to their bishops about this? I think so. Absolutely. Express your concerns and say, look, I'm really concerned because I've noticed that content creators have a lot more influence than the bishops in the United States as a whole. The entire conference of Catholic bishops combined have less influence than all of the content creators combined in the United States. And express to them, that's not a good thing, given that when you look at the scene as a whole, a lot of the content creators are less than faithful to the magisterium, to say the least. Less than faithful. So that's a ticking time bomb. It's an issue waiting to happen. I think we're already seeing it blow up in front of us, but I think it's going to get worse. Daniela says, we do have a lot of events in our diocese, but not the bishop himself. Yeah. Shalom says, take 5 minutes. A bishop should take 5 minutes to put out daily video, open up a smartphone, press record, and upload. The bishop shouldn't need to study and write a script. He's been doing this for decades at this point. I agree. I mean, I think it could be done. Don't get me wrong. I'm 100% in defense of what you're saying. The excuse will be, I'm busy kind of stuff. And I think that's inexcusable. Marp says, my bishop releases 1 clip per month on his Instagram. That's it. That's actually a whole lot more than what I normally see. I normally see 0 from the average bishop out there. So that's actually a lot. Docent says, we need a natural change of generations in the church. Bishops are mostly old-fashioned people who are not familiar with the internet. That is correct. And I think that they're underestimating the influence of social media on people. Now, they will start to, to use the office phrase, they will start to estimate it correctly. What's the joke? Next time, I hope you don't underestimate me. I hope that you'll estimate me. Anyways, you get the point. I hope they'll properly estimate and evaluate the situation. And I think they'll do so whenever they realize how this is impacting their pockets. When Catholics are no longer donating to their diocese, they'll notice then. When they start donating to schismatic bishop so-and-so out there, instead of their own bishop, they'll notice then. But by then, it's way too late, isn't it? It's a day late, dollar short at that point to address it only whenever you notice it impacts your financial, the bottom line of your financial statement. At that point, it's way too late. So something needs to be done now. It needs to be done now. And we need to see bishops managing content creators within their own diocese, and they're not doing that. They're just allowing them to go wild and say anything and everything. And that's just insane. Not only that, they don't realize some of these cardinals and bishops who have zero actual authority in the church today, because they have no jurisdiction, no territory, no diocese, nothing, no particular church. So they, practically speaking and canonically speaking, have no binding authority over the faithful. They practically have more authority over the faithful than their actual bishops who actually have authority over them. And that's disturbing, because you would then think that those bishops would speak up and say something. You know, when they see that another bishop out there who's retired or has no jurisdiction is exercising authority over their actual flock, you would think they would speak up and say something. And yet they aren't. And yet they aren't. And instead, it's Catholic laity having to call out those bishops and cardinals. No, it should be bishops doing that. Bishops should be speaking up. Not only that, but the Pope. And if they don't, well, then don't be surprised when your churches are empty and they go elsewhere. I think that's what it's coming to. So it needs to be addressed now before it's too late. So if y'all can certainly reach out to your bishops, make them aware, that would be incredibly helpful. Vincent says bishops should focus more on teaching and appoint someone else to manage the business side. I agree. But in reality, as we know right now, bishops are mostly administrators more than they are anything else. And that's to our shame. Do we need more dioceses? I've been saying that. If you had way more dioceses, you would have less people to manage. And that way you could be much more intimate in your pastoring of people and shepherding of souls. If you're a bishop who has 1 million people in your jurisdiction, how in the world can you really shepherd people? You can't, not in any meaningful way. But that ultimately is going to be on the Pope to do. Bishops can't just do that by themselves. The Pope would actually have to do that, and I think it would be way too controversial. There would just be way too many bishops out there who are like, no, I'm not accepting this huge cut in my diocese, and cutting it out and having to share it with a whole bunch of other people. There's a lot of bishops who are not going to go for that. They don't want that. My diocese, Richmond, has over 1 million parishioners. Right, and it's part of the problem. Absolutely. Greywa says, did you see my last comment? I did not. Let me see. People have made these influencers and theologians heroes in their minds, so if they fall, they view Catholicism as falling. We should look to Scripture and the magisterium. I agree. But unfortunately, that's just not how most people see it right now. So we're kind of setting people up for failure when we don't teach them better, when bishops don't teach them better and address this situation. So, like I said, it's an issue ready to erupt in front of our very eyes. My diocese has around 50,000 people, Vincent says. Kefa says, did you see my last comment? Okay, let me go see it. I didn't see it. Okay. He says, the problem is people don't want to listen to their bishop. They get militant about their following of theologians or YouTubers, and they become the final say in what's Catholic to them. I agree. This is what Dona Veritatis warned about when it spoke of a parallel magisterium of theologians. I think you could just replace that with parallel magisterium of social influencers, social media influencers, or parallel magisterium of retired bishops who have no actual jurisdiction and no assignment. There's a parallel magisterium there where you have retired cardinals, retired bishops who have no actual binding authority in the church. You see them exercising too much influence over and against the ones who actually do have binding authority in their particular church. Do you think bad priests are a result of these kinds of bishops? I don't know. I'm sure it's a very large combination of a number of issues. I also think a lot of people have lost confidence in the bishops after the COVID issue. A lot of people have lost confidence. They felt like, they were all complicit in the shutting down of churches and all this and that. And so a lot of people have just kind of tuned out the bishops for that reason. JAKAP says, I don't understand why a bishop would risk eternity. I'm sure they don't see it that way. JA says, our bishops are turning away from being shepherds. Again, I'm sure they don't see it that way. Shalom says, I mean, at least the bishops could find the best influencers, fund them, and allow that person to use their seal and have their approval. That's interesting. That's kind of like what happened with theologians. You know, theologians were supposed to have a mandate from the bishop to teach on their behalf. So you're kind of speaking of something parallel like that with social media influencers or theologians online, if you will. It's kind of a similar thing. And yeah, not a bad idea, right? It would be good for bishops and to kind of give some approbation to some of these social media influencers. That way you kind of know that they have some sort of recognition and they're not just out there saying whatever they want without any kind of episcopal oversight. That would be helpful. I'm not opposed to that. There could be a possible solution of a Vatican list of content creators in good standing with the church until an actual solution is formed. Yeah, it'd be helpful, but again, the Vatican is even less in touch with what's going on. They're even more out of touch than the local bishop, sadly. So I kind of feel like the bishops need to address this issue at the very least. Okay. Not every bishop is a good speaker like Moses is not good with words. Well, you know, I think part of being a bishop is being an effective communicator. So I kind of wonder if one is going to say, hey, you know, that's not my thing, then I kind of wonder, hey, you know, is being a bishop your thing? I'm sorry, I don't know. Ireland is in the process of reducing its number of dioceses from 26 to around 14. Yikes, that's the opposite direction. I mean, more dioceses is not working here in Vatican's view. I think that's the exact opposite. But okay. Looking through the chat. What do I think of one diocese per city? Yeah, that's kind of an old school canonical rule, right? That's how it was way back in the day. Yeah, much more effective, right? I think it's gotten out of hand at this point. They're just way too large. Okay. Vincent says many content creators aren't educated enough to be making videos. I see this all the time when it comes to the magisterium. I agree with you 100%. I agree. Y'all got to stop making it clear to some of us that we may be called to become young bishops. All right. AJ says, I believe you, Michael, have been effective at the new evangelization. Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope so. What is this from Shalom? Maybe a decade or two is not long enough for the church to take action. Social media is technically still new. You know, I just don't buy that. I'm sorry. There's a lot of things that they were really quick to react to, so I'm just not buying that. And then number two, that even if that were true, which I don't think it is, even if that were true, the church is slow to react. That's inexcusable. Because, okay, let's say you have a reaction 20, 30 years later. Okay, what about all the souls that have perished in that 20 to 30 years waiting on the church to do something? It's inexcusable. So, yeah, but I'm not buying it because I see the church react like that to some issues, not others. So, yeah, I don't buy it. Okay. All right. Josh says the parish I went to yesterday was packed, which was nice to see. That's awesome. And I'm glad to hear that's going well for you. I think you're going to be starting OCIA soon. Is that correct? Kefa says, my bishop does even use his cathedral. He uses one if the smaller parishes in the whole diocese. Oh, that's interesting. Bishops funding social influencers could only backfire, being looked at as paid shills, as if they flip irreparable damage costs. There will certainly be people who will dismiss them because of that, but those are people who aren't serious about the Catholic faith anyway. So I don't know if that's really relevant. If somebody wants to say, oh, I'm not going to listen to you because you're funded by the bishops, well, you're already dealing at that point with a person who isn't fully Catholic anyway. Because what you have there is a person who now wants to ignore the magisterium in lawful authority in the church. And so are you really even dealing with a Catholic at that point? Hey, thanks for watching that highlight clip. If you want to watch the full video, click on the link in the show notes. By the way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, if you want to support this channel, a great way to do it is patreon.com/Reason and Theology. You'll also get access to extra patron-only content. Check it out now, patreon.com/Reason and Theology. God bless.